Peace, Tobin here. I wanted to talk to you about something interesting today. I wanted to discuss what we term as disabilities in our society. Now, growing up, I was diagnosed with a so-called disability, as I'm sure many of the people watching this video were, or know somebody who was. Now, what's very interesting about the term disability means we are unable to do something, which I don't agree with at all. There are many different types of consciousness on the planet, and that's where these so-called disabilities come into definition. There is a perceived normal in our society. Who is determining that normal, right? Obviously, there are the genetic issues and there are neurological issues that occur, but what is normal? What makes able and what makes disabled? And who gets to decide that? Now, I'm going to offer a different perspective right now because I've spent many years not only meditating on this and contemplating the meaning of so-called disabilities, but at the same time discovering that there's a ton of valid science that proves perception of consciousness is more of what it is. It's a difference in perception of consciousness in the world and sensory inputs that we determine as either a disability or an ability or a hyperability. Now, what I'd like to explain to you is specifically something I've experienced, and I've also worked with clients like this: Tourette syndrome. This is a neurological disorder, they say, where the brain is overfiring, sending extra messages to the parts of the body that is determining mechanism, right? So if my brain is sending too many messages to my eyes to blink, you're going to see me excessively blinking until I become aware of it and try to harness that. Now, what's interesting is there's still that extra energy. There's that extra nervous push or nerve push emanating from the central nervous system to whatever extremity or whatever modality it's being channeled to. Now, when I stop that, or when somebody with Tourette syndrome decides to stop the flow of that and not react to what's been occurring, now we have all this extra energy. Think about that for a second. What was once a disability now becomes a superpower. All of this extra neurological energy that was being sent around my body or anybody with Tourette syndrome, we become victim of if we do not take the power back. But once we do take the power back and the tick cannot affect us, what can we then affect with all that energy and that awareness? Think about that for a second. Anybody with Tourette syndrome out there, don't be a victim of the ticks. Use that knowledge that your brain is pumping extra energy throughout every aspect of your body, maybe specifically channeled to one area or one habit or one movement or one emanation of that energy, right? Channel that. Then you can determine what you want to do with all that extra energy. I give you a prime example. Tim Howard, a professional soccer goalkeeper, suffers severe Tourette syndrome. But when you see him on the field, he is rarely suffering any tics. Now, why? Because his focus and his attention is on something he is super passionate about and at the same time super skilled at. He has attained such success because he has this extra neurological ability to harness energy and channel energy, and he is one of the rare few on this planet currently that has been able to do so and turn his disability into a superpower, which I'm aiming for you to do. Now, on top of that, if you're like, I don't have Tourette syndrome, what does this apply to me? Do you have autism? Do you have Down syndrome? Do you have OCD? All of these things are similar. They're not the same, but what was once perceived as a disability can be a hyperability. For example, and the reason I have these papers is because I wrote this down. I made some notes about studies I've done, research I've done into science, consciousness, neurology, how the brain works, how genetics work, and also how the personality works, right? Because every person that's in a body isn't the same. They don't have the same courage. They don't have the same will. They don't have the same amount of effort, love, faith, belief in self. These are things that we can condition through repatterning. Some of us are born with it more naturally. For those of us who haven't had the environment that said, hey man, you could do anything with yourself, don't mind a disability, use that to your advantage, well, I'm sorry that that's happened, but now you have somebody saying to you that your so-called disability can be transformed to a superpower. You just got to put in the work and use that gift that the universe gave you for good. Simple. So that said, I've worked with a lot of people, a lot of clients, and also made friends with people in different communities. suffering from Tourette syndrome and being able to overcome it, I wanted to work with people in the autistic community who are misunderstood and not necessarily given the potential that everybody else is given for certain judgmental reasons or societal reasons. You know, we're in a state of consciousness, but let's expand that now. Individuals with Down syndrome, individuals with severe OCD that wouldn't let them leave the house or live a normal life, these things can be challenged. Now, just entertain this. I'm not saying this is the end-all be-all for everybody. This is not a simple solution, but it's a possibility to not be labeled or self-label yourself as disabled, but just able and a different type of consciousness than other people. That's it, all right? We're a planet of very diverse people. Let's give everyone an option to contribute and not just send them to the corner of society and we just kind of forget about them. That said, Tourette syndrome teaches mastery over mind and body when you harness it. Downs teaches joy and emotional innocence and purity. If you've ever met somebody or encountered somebody with Down syndrome, they are typically exuberantly happy from some of the smallest things in the world. Now, they might be hyper emotional in different areas, but again, that's channeling the energy and realizing your superpower. These beings were born with a consciousness to show the rest of us miserable humans that we can find joy in the littlest things. We can be grateful for who we are and what we were born with. Simple. Okay? If you know anybody or you personally yourself have Down syndrome, you have a superpower, my friend, or your friend has a superpower. And please remind them of that, okay? This planet is in despair right now. We need as much joy and positivity as possible. So if you want to be healed emotionally and spiritually, connect with somebody who has Down syndrome. Genuinely connect with their heart and their consciousness. And I guarantee you may learn something new about yourself and the world, and your perspective may shift for the better. Okay? OCD. It's very interesting. This is very clear. It teaches thoroughness. Right? These people are very thorough, they're very meticulous. It seems like it plagues them. But if they were able to channel this skill, and I'm calling it a skill, into a specific mode or career or job or task, they would be the most organized, clean people on the planet. Now, I'm not saying this goes for everybody, and of course, it's another cultivation thing. But what we need to realize is that if the brain is telling all these messages, do this over and over again, repeat, do you know what that is? Spiritual communities and mystical communities value this more than anything. It's called ritual. It's called repetition. It's called pattern. Professional athletes do not become professional athletes because they shoot a basketball once and it goes in, or they're really good at checking people on the ice. No, they need repetition of practice and skill and embedding that into their intuition, into their unconscious nature, so that when an opportunity presents itself, they instinctively do this without having to mentally choose, right? So someone who has OCD, instead of feeling so bad about themselves and feeling the need to medicate and thinking that their so-called obsessiveness or their compulsive disorder is a disability, treat it like a superpower and find a proper place for yourself in society or the person you know where their skills, not disabilities, can be best utilized to help the whole. I think it's very simple. It's going to take some time, but if we see these so-called disabilities now as superpowers and we find the place for these superheroes to be, the world's going to change for the better. Now, the last one I want to talk about is autism. I've worked more closely with so-called autistic people, which if anybody knows anything about autism, they say it's the spectrum. A spectrum is a wide, vast array of things. When we're describing spectrum of color, we're talking about all the colors. Yet, when we talk about autism, we say they're on the spectrum, but then we isolate them from the rest of us in society, and I don't believe that makes much sense. Some of the autistic people I've met in my life, and I've had other people say this to me, thank me for having autistic high school kids at my business, my fitness center, because they taught them, the autistic person taught the so-called normal person more about themselves in 5 minutes of conversation than all of that person's friends have in their entire life. Why? From what I've noticed, and maybe you've experienced this too, or maybe you are an autistic diagnosed person on the spectrum and you know this true of yourself. These people are very honest. They're very uninhibited. They don't bite their tongue. They say what they feel and they do it very emotively and passionately. okay? And I'm going to reference this young man, Zach. I'm not going to say a last name, but he inspired me and some of my friends more than anybody in my life to take a look at ourselves from a point of reflection that we all feel we're disabled in some way. And this was a autistic kid, very high functioning, very intelligent, but autistic. He had diagnosable social issues, was going through a certain trauma, but at the same time, in his youth, I think he was 17 or 18, he was teaching 30-year-olds lessons about how to be more self-aware and mindful and kind to themselves. Wild. His honesty was unreal. And what was so amazing about Zach specifically is he was extremely technical. Now, this is a guy who wasn't necessarily going to go to college, wasn't necessarily going to work a brilliant career one day, but his focus was like a laser. He could tell you every single thing about a Volkswagen car, from the details of how the engine is put together, and I imagine he could put one together and take it apart if he wanted to, and probably has at this point, and hasn't really told anybody, or maybe he has. Maybe we'll know about Zach years later, but Zach inspired me to record this, to write these things down, and to offer an adjustment in our entire collective consciousness's perspective on so-called disabled people, and maybe we can learn lessons from these people instead of being so judgmental and disabling ourselves and our own consciousness. If we were open receivers to this different form of consciousness, I truly believe our worlds will begin very quickly to evolve for the better, and we will come together as one, okay? To restructure how we see disability and to maybe empower these people and find a channel of society where they are super functional and they can help and they can be satisfied and they can be emotionally stable as a result is our goal as so-called normal people, okay? We need to adjust our perspective. I'm going to record this in two parts. This is part two of the same, the so-called disabilities now being seen as hyper abilities or superpowers, okay? This is my second page of this that I wrote down. I wrote some notes. Hope that's okay. I have notes here. I'm a human. I don't memorize everything, and this is a probably 15-20 minute video, so I appreciate your patience and understanding. But look at this. This is something I learned after experiencing a significant amount of pain, nerve damage, and as a result, emanating sensations slowly coming back to my body and figuring out what my nerves were doing. And what I discovered that being ticklish, right? We see this as a negative thing because when somebody tickles us, we lose control. Think about that. When we're getting tickled by somebody, we kind of get angry or upset because we have lost control. They've taken our control because they stimulated something in our body that makes us go out of control. Now, reverse that. Being ticklish is a tool for self-control, for sensory control. As the sensory input is conducted, the mind attempts to react. But if our higher self intervenes and recognizes these nerve impulses and then chooses not to react, and allow continued transmission of such a nerve impulse instigated by that tickle or pain interaction, we then can bypass it. Okay, this is a training system. This is like dribbling a basketball or shooting a free throw. It's practice. It's not going to happen right away. I'm not saying ask somebody to tickle you and then all of a sudden you can have self-mastery over everything. But being ticklish is a way to trigger your mind's ability to ignore physical stimulus. So that, God forbid, you get hurt one day, you're not disabled because you are mentally and emotionally reacting to an injury. You can pick yourself up and get yourself to help and then react if you want to. But I'm going to propose that you're not going to react because you're going to quickly realize, oh gosh, this is just my body, but it's my body. I'm not its soul. It's human. So if it tells me to feel something, I can say, oh, I understand the physical input, what you're providing to me, but I'm not going to react to that emotionally or mentally because that's not conducive to my survival right now. That's not conducive to my highest self. That's not conducive to my evolution of consciousness and my ability to control these autonomic systems. Sort of like Wim Hof diving into ice cold water to force his body into a reaction so that his mind has to take over. It has to bypass that tickle pain sensation. Does that make sense? That's another way of viewing it. Now let's get back to those subjects we were talking about before. The Tourette syndrome, ADHD, OCD, autism, Down syndrome. A couple more notes on these things, and I just want to remind you guys in part 2 of this video that you are not disabled, you have superpowers. And anybody tells you different is not giving you a possibility of advancing your consciousness, nor are they doing so for themselves. So remember that. Don't feel angry at somebody who's trying to label you or box you up or push you to a certain part of society. That person is also doing that inside of themselves to a certain degree. That's why it's reflecting out to you. So for those of you suffering from Tourette syndrome or know anybody that have Tourette syndrome, remind them of this or remind yourself of this daily. Tourette's teaches ultimate mastery over self. If you're suffering from ADHD or somebody's diagnosed you as having hyperactivity, or you know somebody with ADHD, don't judge them. Don't make them feel bad about it. That's a superpower. You just need to know how to use it, my friend, or you need to teach your friends how to use so. You know why? Because ADHD, in literal definition, means infinite energy. Those with low energy call somebody with infinite energy hyperactive. Very simple. I'm not getting angry at low energy people. I am encouraging high energy people to use that extra energy, which is like having a triple-sized gas tank, which means your car can go 3 times as far as the average person. You're not a car though. So if you have dreams and you have goals and you have talents and you have skills, you have multitudes more energy than the average person. If you so-called have ADHD, you need to channel that energy and you have superpowers. Sorry, normal people. You labeled all these ADHD people and now they're about to become superhumans, so good luck competing with them. OCD. These are our super focused and multi-dimensionally organized humans. We need to teach them that. We need to not make them feel ridiculed about their obsessive compulsive disorder, which is not a disorder. It's a different form of consciousness. Let these people channel their focus. Teach these people to channel their focus. If you're one of these people, channel your focus into something you truly care about that you believe can impact the world in a positive way. You are multi-dimensionally organized beyond the average person who can only do a single or 2 tasks at a time. Use your superpowers properly. I encourage you. Autism. This is a different way to think about it. I reflected on Zach. I reflected on other people I've met and I've interacted with my whole life. Autism is an old term for what we will soon understand as someone who's super tuned to the universal rhythms. You doubt me? There is pretty much valid proof that some of the greatest musical composers of all time have suffered from a form of autism. Some of the most brilliant scientists, physicists in the world supposedly had a form of autism. Look this up. Okay? If you're out there and somebody say, hey man, you got autism, or you know somebody with autism, and people treat them like they're not a full human being, go out and treat them like a double human being. Because if they have that inspiration, they might change the world for the better, or they might compose the most beautiful symphony of all time, and it was your encouragement that brought them there. Okay? Remember that. And Down syndrome. I truly feel in the state of the world today and the state of consciousness of most people on this planet, despair, a refugee mentality, a tortured mentality, a lot of ethnic cultures and certain groups in our society. And it's vast at this point, but we have women's suffrage, we have transgender issues, we have gays suffering judgment and ridicule. We're all human beings, okay? Now, I feel for all of our modern causes, but if we look back through history, the people that have received the worst treatment by we humans throughout all of history were the so-called disabled. And I would imagine a syndrome like Down syndrome throughout society that was potentially less enlightened than we are now and less compassionate than we are now did not treat these people so well. And I fully and truly and genuinely believe that these people are going to save us. Their ability to be pure joy is Buddha-like sometimes, okay? I think a big amount of the reason they on an individual level get upset and frustrated is because they are comparing themselves to our consciousness, which is nothing to be admired. As humans, we are very angry, we are very malicious, we are very vengeful, we are very jealous. I don't know if people with Down syndrome experience those same emotions negatively. I think they are very grateful. They love the people around them. They are exuberant. They experience a lot of joy, at least in my personal one-on-one experience as real life with these people. Now, something I've been trying to cultivate for many years. I come from northern New Jersey, right outside New York City. It might be the most jaded place on the planet. The opposite of jaded, to me, is innocence. Like the lamb, right? Let's not get too biblical, but innocence seems to be one of the ultimate goals of human life. To return ourselves and restore ourselves to that childhood innocence, which it seems a lot of people diagnosed with Down syndrome are in, that form of consciousness. They resonate that pure innocence more genuinely, more authentically, and more profoundly than the rest of us normal people that have labeled them disabled. So with all that said, this is the end of this video. I hope this inspires at least one of you to readjust your perspective of maybe yourself if you are dealing with one of these alternative forms of consciousness, or if you have people in your life, or if you've experienced somebody with one of these alternative forms of consciousness. I highly encourage you to let your judgment subside, which is a programmed, conditioned thing. You're not at fault for it. It's our society's issue that we're trying to resolve here. And I encourage you to try to empower that person, to teach them that their form of consciousness is a superpower and it can be valued and utilized to benefit all of us on this planet. And I feel that if we start to do this, we're going to come together as a species much more rapidly than if not. And we will start to understand all of the other species on this world and in this universe, and maybe evolve ourselves again to a higher state of consciousness and the next level of what we were meant to experience on this planet. Once we stop wasting our time with judgments and anger and all these different things, we need to learn from all the creatures that were put on this earth and all their benevolent and admirable aspects and features and skills. And we need to relabel what is so-called disabled. Everybody is able. If you have breath and you have the ability to move or say something nice, you are able. You are not disabled. We need to stop that. Thank you for listening, guys. I love you. See you soon.